Hamill.
Schwartz.
It's good to see you. Hold on.
It sounds like a Court Street law firm.
Exactly right. Philip Roth said about getting older that it's a massacre. Let me tell you, it is. A good old laugh. Pete had some problems, and they'll resolve themselves. In the meantime, he remains Pete Hamill, the man who was so a part of many of our lives for so many years. That wonderful sound on the piece of paper, in the newspaper, in the magazine, and in books. The wonderful, just totally, absolutely original sound of Hamill's speaking voice on a page. I recognized it basically with about 2 or 3 words. Hamill wrote this, even if I didn't know for the moment. And I've known him for years and years. He's been on the radio with me many times. But most of all, the respect I have for him is immeasurable. And I'm not the only one, as I'm sure you know. Many of you are. And I would say most of journalism would take the words Pete Hamill and say, oh, yeah, Hamill. And he is Hamill, and he sits before you. He knew Sinatra a little, as he writes in his book, with a wonderful title. Why Sinatra Matters is the title of the book that was published, and it became a bestseller. In the New York Times, 5 or 6, number 4, 5, 6, 7, something substantial. Pete and I have both shared a love of Sinatra's singing and his music for many reasons, and maybe in this hour we can enunciate those reasons. First of all, talk to me of Sinatra's singing, and then we'll get on to some other things. Just why, for you?
I think what really affected me was not the music that made the little girl squeal at the Paramount in 1943. I was too young. I didn't know that music. I was born in 1935. But after he got in trouble, after Ava, after the kind of things that he was not the first human being ever to do, nor was he the last. But he epitomized, both in the career and in the music, something that those of us who had the good fortune to get raised by New Yorkers had in their blood, which is if you get knocked down, you better get up. And he got up. And the music showed how confident he was in getting up. The music was better than it ever was. In those great albums that he did with Nelson Riddle for Capitol. And what he gave to young men listening to the music, which was a way to express emotion, which was forbidden for young men of a certain age. They were not supposed to feel anything, or they're supposed to feel angry. He says, don't worry about me. I'll get along, and moved. So that stoic note that was in the music also appealed to me as a young dope trying to get women to love me back. You know.
I've heard that some of them did.
What time is it? Guilty with an explanation, as they say in Motor Vehicle Bureau.
Me too.
But I think he gave those of us grasping for some way to express emotions that we had that were always more complicated than simple anger or fury, but it allowed us to see that there's more than one way to have your heart broken. And I think it was that which he was the master of. All of us of a certain age had struggled with loneliness. I was the oldest of 7 kids. The house was not lonely. He's got more peas than I have, you know, that kind of discussion at the dinner table. But if you were the oldest brother, you were the first of 2 immigrants. You were the first American in the building, in the apartment, in the flat, in the tenement. And so you had to find...
Where was that tenement?
It was at 378 7th Avenue, top floor right. It's in a neighborhood now called the South Slope. It had no name when we were there. It proves that the creators of neighborhoods are real estate guys, you know. But it was between Park Slope and Windsor Terrace. And it was a working class neighborhood of Irish, Italians, and Jews. There was only one black guy living in the neighborhood. So when Jackie Robinson came along, we were all 12 or 13 years old, and we were going to show the world that we had the best player, no matter what his color. There was nobody to express it to in the neighborhood. None of our friends were someone who were people who could embrace that, except in the abstract. It was a neighborhood where it had its own society. It had its own bad dopes. It had its own heroes. It had people who joined the service.
Now this is the late 30s and early 40s.
This is after the war, basically, because the big change was after the war because of one great government program that none of these people who love the middle class in the abstract would ever embrace now, which is the GI Bill of Rights, that gave all of us our lives. It allowed me and many others, the children of candy store owners, the children of iron workers, the children of construction people, a chance to say, Spinoza belongs to me too. And going to schools and finding ways to see the world that they could not, one generation earlier, could not have imagined.
I'm just thinking of Ted Cruz thinking and saying, that GI thing, that's a good idea. Of course, it's just, that kind of person running now for the presidency, what would he have done with the GI? The GI.
Oh, they'd have said, first of all, no Muslims.
What?
You know. Then
No Irish.
it would go downhill from that.
No Jews.
Yeah, of course.
Just no one. Literally no one.
Yeah, the only people you could put in it were people from Alabama.
Right.
You know.
Well, where does Sinatra come in to your consciousness? When you say it's after the war, well, that means that wonderful record, Sweet Lorraine, with Nat Cole. It means
I
so
just
many of
found
those
joy.
Sammy Kahn, Julie Stein songs that were just so wonderful. The things we did last summer.
It came to me. My mother worked in a movie house, in the box office, selling tickets. And she started work at 5 o'clock every night. So she would do all the household stuff during the day. And the key instrument of our understanding the world in the most primitive way was the radio. There was no television yet. We're talking 1947, 48, 49.
Can you imagine how important the radio was in his early life and then Sinatra's later life?
Yeah. I mean, Sinatra's born 1915. By 1925, radio was organized. They now have networks at that time. And so people, just as an example of the kind of people that were born in the same year as Sinatra, Billie Holiday, Edith Piaf, Orson Welles, who made his first success on radio.
And did the 1938 show.
Yeah.
It scared the hell out of everybody.
Yeah, War of the Worlds.
On radio.
Yeah, on radio. And also Arthur Miller got first involved in, he couldn't afford to go to the Broadway theater every week, but he could hear what they were talking about on the radio. So I think the radio, and you spent your life in radio, so you don't have to be told this, but I think the radio was one of those things that fed the imagination, because you would hear somebody on the inner sanctum or something, and you'd feel you'd imagine what they looked like. You'd put faces on the voices. For a kid who ends up being a writer, it was a perfect instrument, the way a good novel would have been, where there's no illustrations. So for me, and not just for me, but for me, the radio really put Sinatra into my head. You know, I would love hearing him when he would begin to sing. I think also I liked, my mother and father both had slight accents, Irish accents from Northern Ireland. They never knew each other there. They met in New York. But my mother was a fanatic about pronunciation. And she would point out Sinatra, saying, listen to the way he says the words, you know, and get us so he wouldn't talk like this. You know, and say, hey, what are you doing, hey? You know, we didn't do that, you know, or she would say, come on, you know. And we weren't the only people. Congressman Serrano from Puerto Rico told me once that after the book came out, that he learned how to speak really crisp English listening to Sinatra. And he had nobody to teach him. His parents were from Puerto Rico. And so nobody was in there saying how to say a word and give it a kind of nobility by pronouncing it correctly. So I think all that was part of it. You can't ever sort out later why you were good at one thing and not at another. Why did I fail geometry? You know, because it had no story. There was no line in there. Who were the bad guys here? Besides the teacher, you know. But it showed me very early that a lot of life is in the details. That you gotta, one, listen to other people before you decide what they are or who they are. You gotta, listen to their language, listen to the way they say it, but what they're saying at the same time. And I was lucky because I didn't know any better. I was a classic autodidact in a way. I ended up at a very good Jesuit school called Regis, but lasted only 2 years. You know, the Jesuits drove me out of my mind. You know, which is why I like this Pope more than any of them. He's a Jesuit.
You know,
he's got a sense of irony. He's got a...
Oh, this is a wonderful Pope.
Yeah.
But reminds me of the one moment in my own high school world, the only thing that happened that I enjoyed was something I thought to say in a history class, where we were all in the class, 17 kids. We were asked to make up the most improbable political headlines. That was a way to teach us, according to Mr. Cowing. Just a dreadful man. In any event, so it went around, people made up, Roosevelt dances. And it came to me, and what the most improbable headline was, and I said, Pope elopes. That's the only thing that I ever did or ever participated in or ever experienced in high school that gave me some sort of pleasure. And I had to make the damn pleasure.
So to ask you the same question, Jonathan, how did you become conscious of Sinatra's existence, even listening to the music?
My first 8 years were spent in California. My father was working for films, writing songs with Ira Gershwin and Frank Lesser and Johnny Mercer and Howard Dietz. And so we were there. And the hum of Crosby was nice enough. I didn't pay much attention to it, but it was a hum. My father waited for the Andre Castellanets show on Sundays. It's an hour.
That's great.
Yeah. But there was another hum, and I didn't really listen to that, though I listened a little harder than for Crosby. I speak obviously of Sinatra. At that time, very close to where we're sitting, I mean, amazingly close, 94th and 3rd, there was a Macmillan's bar, a wonderful Irish bar. And they let me in after school. I was, 14, 15. But I asked for some beer. They would give me beer. I asked for a shot of scotch, they would give it to me. And they had this jukebox, and it played Patti Page and Georgia Gibbs and Frankie Lane. And one day, someone put in a dime, that's right, a dime, and on came Sinatra's newly made record of The Birth of the Blues. Now, The Birth of the Blues had nothing whatsoever to do with my existence, the lyric of it. But it literally brought me to my knees as I knelt in front of the jukebox. And I asked the bartender to give me 10 dimes, and I gave him $1. And I just played it 10 times. There were only about 2 or 3 people. It was just 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday. And Sinatra kept singing The Birth of the Blues. And I recalled that he was that second hum that I listened to a little more closely than Crosby. And I started to look back at what preceded Birth of the Blues. And I read what I could and found what I could on the subject of this man. And even bought some of those Columbia singles. These were still singles, 7/8 RPMs, 98 cents at 86th Street between Lexington and 3rd. There was a record store. And I began to buy these records he made with Axel Sordal, these lovely records of beautiful songs written by wonderful composers and writers of beautiful words. And then, I don't know how it happened. I really didn't have the information clearly that I have now. But I had this Wee Small Hours album, and I brought it home. $4.98. And although I was so young and not really involved with anyone except for a young girl named Susan Druss, who lived across the street from this building on 92nd Street. That wasn't an involvement. It was just, oh my God, she's pretty. But whatever I had, it was enough to respond to Wee Small Hours. 16 songs. My father wrote one of them, the 6th song on the first side. I see your face before me. And before you know it, well, first of all, I nagged my father. He was going back west to do something. And I said, listen, you're connected. There's this new album, Swingin' something loving something. Please, when you come back, bring it with you. It's not supposed to come out till April. Well, there was to be a screening of something my father worked on out in California, and I went to the screening. It was called High Tour, television for CBS. And there was a piano in the screening room, and on the top of the piano I saw a splash of orange. Now, you may recall the cover of Songs for Swinging Lovers. It's that orange. I never looked back. Those two right together. Never looked back. 32 songs, a whole different temperament, just like Sinatra, a whole different temperament. But you had, as I did in later life, a relationship with him. How would you characterize yours?
I was one of his New York friends. In other words, I never visited his house in California or stayed over or anything like that. He would come, I was introduced first by Jimmy Cannon, and got to know him better. And he would, when he came to New York, if he had a 2-week engagement somewhere, he would call me up and say, "What are you doing? Did you eat yet?" You know, and I'd say, "No," as a matter of fact. And off I'd go. I was single at the time. I had a house in Brooklyn, but I could get to Manhattan easily then. It's not like today, which is some kind of crazy traffic jam. And at one point he asked me if I would write his book. And that's why he told me a lot of stuff. I said, "It depends. I don't want to write a book about you and we don't deal with certain things. The wise guys, the women, you know.
Did you say this out loud to him?
Yeah. And he said to me, "The women, I love them all." He said, "They were running around and everything. Sometimes it was even fun. But if I talked about those guys," and he pressed his nose.
Right.
He said, "Someone might come knocking at my fucking door." Forgive me for vulgarity. And I laughed out loud. And then he changed his mind on that, but I backed out. I didn't want to do it after. He threw some kind of party for Spiro Agnew. And I said, "How do I explain this to my daughters?" I can't say I needed to feed you. And I called up, I forget his lawyer's name, who was a kind of agent.
Mickey Rudin.
Mickey Rudin. And backed out. And he was really furious about it. And I feel bad about it in certain ways because there's certain facts about.
What year did he ask you to do that?
78, maybe.
78?
Maybe.
That late?
Yeah.
Because
I'd have to look at that.
I ask you that for this reason. I'd come very friendly with him. I went out to the desert a lot, as you know. One time, I was in his house. He took me on a funniest thing. At the kitchen door, there was a very thin walkway, right, maybe 6 feet, and over there was another building of some kind, and there was a roof to this small thing. And guess what he had out of each side? Umbrellas for the 6 feet walk. And I laughed, and I pointed it out to him. He didn't find it funny. But at that point, at one time, he said, "Would you like to write my book?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I do this radio show." And he said, "But you'd have to follow me all over the world." I remember saying, "I could do that." In the end, he never approached me again. I never approached him again on the subject of the book, and no one wrote such a book.
Yeah.
There is yours, of course. There is James Kaplan's splendid new book called The Chairman, which is a full biography. There are many, many other books in the hundreds. And he never did write his book, and he never took Hamill or me or no one. Talese would have been wonderful, but he wrote that wonderful piece, Frank Sinatra Has a Cold, which is one of the finest piece of Germans, not interesting, piece of journalism that I know. And I think that Talese is somewhere around tonight, so that's good.
He's here.
But that's how I got into it and became maniacal and studied the arrangements. And I pushed myself into Nelson's life just to get to know him. And I did. And he told me some wonderful things. He was very droll and very quiet. His music is so sexy, so wonderful. So when Sinatra came in for the first time to hear Nelson's arrangement of I've Got You Under My Skin, he hadn't heard it. And he came in the studio and he heard it. And all members of the band stood up and applauded Nelson. But Frank said to him, standing right next to him, "Nelson, you're a gasser." And Nelson, in his droll way, replied, "Likewise." Likewise.
That's great.
You had a section, which we'll get to later on, but a wonderful section, and you do have it in this new version of your book, which is slightly longer, about riding with Sinatra in a cab, as I recall. And I'm going to later on ask you to read a little from it.
Sure.
You talked about it, so you know it. How did that come to be?
It was simple. It was just casual. We had spent the night in some joint, and it was time to go home. And
Well, you must have been disappointing to him because you don't drink.
yeah, but maybe that's why he liked me. You know, he might have. I think he respected it in a certain way.
Pete wrote a book about stopping. He's a guy who just stopped. Okay, that's it. Goodbye. No more. And no more to this day.
Yeah. But I remember one day I was walking in Midtown, and Gil Clancy, the great boxing trainer who trained Emil Griffith and all kinds of people, he sees me, and he says, "What are you up to?" I said, he said, let's have a drink. I said, "Gil, I retired with the title." And he said, "What division?"
So Sinatra, the night, so on, you're with him, and this is the night with the taxi.
Yeah. And he was
staying at the Waldorf.
something happened.
Waldorf.
I think it was, yeah. Something in the night of drinking with various people. Not because of Jilly Rizzo's line where there was a discussion going on at the table, I swear. Who's better, Hemingway or Fitzgerald? And Jilly says, "Fitzgerald, nobody can sing like her." You know. But something, you know, made him very thoughtful by the end of the night, and that's what that sort of monologue at the end of the book.
Well, but how'd you get into the cab with him and stay with him all that long?
How did I stay? I mean, why didn't he?
How did it happen? I mean, this is a long, around and round Central Park.
No, to me it was just I had detected that in Sinatra there was this. Wasn't present all the time, but there was this core of loneliness that came, I think, from being an only child in a time when all families were the opposite of lonely. And so when he said, basically, take a ride, I gotta go home. I went with him, and then I could go somewhere else and get home in the subway. And he began to essentially, I should read the piece.
Well, why do we save it till the end? 'Cause
Okay.
I just wanted to kind of set it up.
Yeah.
You got something wonderful coming up in a little while.
Yeah.
Just for everyone's knowledge, and even mine too, if we look at his body of work, as you have written, the capital years, simply what he became was a genius, and that's, I don't use the word lightly. He is a musical genius, and it attracted almost anyone.
Yeah.
Anyone.
That's true.
My friend Tony Monti, a pianist, played in Atlantic City, one gig with his opening act. I don't know who it was, and he played. And in the wings, he watched Sinatra come out and start to sing. As Tony Monti says, my hair stood straight up on my head. This is a guy who knew Sinatra's music, and there he was making this music.
Yeah.
And
I even liked, Jonathan, some of the late stuff, like Summer Wind and the Joe Beam album.
well, that's just a wonderful thing.
Yeah. And it was not conventional choices. I wish he had done a couple of other things. I wish he had done Lush Life. I wish he had done Desperado.
Hold it. Hold it. He tried to do Lush Life.
Did he really?
For Only the Lonely. That wonderful album with
I didn't
Blues
know
in the
that.
Night. Well, you're knowing it now. One for My Baby. 1958 came out in October. And at the first session, which I always call the 6.5 song session, he did 6 songs and then turned to Lush Life. And he sang, and Nelson's arrangement, oh my God, like Gershwin-y, Paris, just beautiful.
A week in Paris will ease the bite of it.
Well, that's another song entirely.
Yeah.
Just entirely. In any event, he sang the verse. I used to visit all the very gay places, those come what may places. And he was kind of stumbling a little, but it was still awfully beautiful. And when he finished, he started the verse of Lush Life, the beginning of the chorus. Bum, 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 bum. And he stopped. And he says, and I have a tape of this. He says, hold it now. And maybe Nelson wasn't there. He was conducting in Vegas with Nelson. Had he been there, the following wouldn't have happened, I'm sure. He said, let's put this aside. And some voice in the room said, why don't we put it away for about a year? I think I've reversed it. Let's put it aside, said someone in the room. And he said, let's put it aside for about a year. And had Nelson been there, Nelson would have said, let's try it again. And it was Felix Slatkin, one of the Slatkin classical players, who was also conducting this on behalf of Nelson. And that's the tragedy of the lack of Lush Life. But there is tape, really good sound, of Sinatra singing the verse to Lush Life.
I would love to hear that. Can you get it anywhere?
I'm afraid not. I can't. Of course, I'll make you a CT of it.
Meet me on the corner.
Which time? 8:45. I'll make a copy of it for you. The whole session.
Wow.
But none of you. Just for Pete. Because he's Pete Hamill. That's right. But anyway, yes, we all had songs like that when the world was young. He did it finally on his last album, Point of No Return. And a bunch of songs by my father that he never did, Alone Together, for example, and others. But he did 6 of them. It's fine. But we were talking, let's say, about the albums and what albums have obsessed you, if anything can obsess you.
We Small Hours.
Swingin' Lovers.
What?
I've Got You Under My Skin.
Yeah. And
That one.
You Make Me Feel So Young. I
Well,
think
that's
of that
Swingin'-
a lot now.
That's Swingin' Lovers. And you have every reason to. As do I. Well, they came right one after the other.
Yeah.
Swingin' Affair.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Joe Beam I play a lot.
He told me that, oh, he didn't tell me, Joe Beam did. He was on my show, and he told me that walking, or he stayed at Sinatra's, and Sinatra complained. He said, you know, these days, it's so hard to learn new songs, and particularly your songs are so different. They're just hard to learn. But he learned enough. And there's this also, do you know, or maybe you don't know this, I could put this on that same CD. There are 8 other songs that they did. And,
Wow.
and it's on another album. It has nothing really basically to do with Sinatra and Joe Beam, except that one half of it. The other half is just trash that was singles that were lying around. But 8 songs are on another CD.
Wow.
Yeah, one he sings with Joe Beam. And I think you'd like it.
Good.
So there's another thing goes on your CD.
Good. I'll
and-
take it.
Do you know the album, the late album called She Shot Me Down?
Yeah.
It's his last brilliant album.
And I remember it, but I don't know if I have it home.
It has a very dark cover. Well, there are many of them.
Yeah.
But I've been handed these pieces of paper. These are questions from you. And they have been vetted. So I'm going to ask Pete to answer some of these questions. And then I'm going to ask him to actually read from that part of his book that I mentioned. Hamill, what would you like to have asked Sinatra that you couldn't or wouldn't ask?
I would have liked to ask him some questions about his father. His mother is prominent in the tale of his youth. But
I had dinner with her and him. He looked like a bulldog
yeah.
at that point.
Well, he had that line, which I quote, which he said to me anyway, but that's in the book, where he said, my mother kept a little bat behind the bar, and every time I misbehaved, whack, she'd hit me, and then she'd hug me. And I married the same girl every time.
I always thought he was bipolar, and that would come from there too.
Yeah, that would fit, yeah. But the father, we never knew, was he illegal or illegal, or, you know. He
was
boxed under the name Marty.
He was
Marty
Marty
O'Brien.
Sinatra, Marty O'Brien.
Yeah.
A lot of things in Palm Springs have his name on it.
His real name or his?
Martin
or
Sinatra.
Ah.
What would you like to have asked Sinatra? It's the same question. What was his biggest attribute or fault we have here? That's easy.
The fault was allowing some people to, for small reasons, to provoke them into anger and the need to reply somehow. But I think he also had a very good, generous heart. I remember after Sugar Ray Robinson, the great champion, about whom somebody once said, there was Ray Robinson and then there was the top 10. When he retired, he had been, a lot of his money had disappeared because of a crooked accountant. And he was 43 or something, he couldn't fight anymore. Sinatra took care of him. He was living in California, all the expenses of the house and everything, but with no press conference to announce this act of generosity and kindness. That he, and from what I've heard from other people, there were other cases like that.
Oh, yes.
And I think in that sense, he had a good heart. I'm sure he regretted some of the things that he got in trouble with. Why get in trouble over belting Lee Mortimer, one of the worst columnists in the history of journalism?
Oh, it's just absolutely true.
He was awful, But why, that's one way you just sell taxi and get out of there. But he I'm sure must have regretted some of those conflicts.
Oh, absolutely.
I
I have regrets, but only a few, like
Yeah.
in the song.
Yeah.
He had more than a few. Here, I gave this to you to see. It's something you can answer easily.
Yeah. Was Sinatra really tender or tough? I think a little of each. I think he was tender, as I was just saying, but he could be tough in the best sense of that word. The fact that he got up off the ground and came back, that's a tough guy. And yet he could be tender too. Years later, I interviewed Ava Gardner here in New York. And she was drinking a little bit. She was here for some reason. And where was she staying? At Sinatra's apartment at the Waldorf Astoria. This is like 14 years after they broke up. So there was a tender part of him that still loved somebody who clearly, chemically didn't function well, but that was somebody who made a whole lot of difference in his life. And
in ours,
Yeah.
because of the music.
Yeah, because of the music.
She informed much of the music.
That's in my book, one of the things. I only really write in detail about two of the women, Nancy and Ava Gardner, because they have both affected the music in different ways. The other stuff, I mean, he said to me once about Mia Farrow, he said, I still don't know what the hell that was all about. Neither did we, And I think all of us have some story like that about ourselves.
He told his lawyer, Mickey Rudin, who was saying before the marriage, what you doing there? And he said, listen, we've just got to have a couple of years. We've got to do it. He saw marriage as a couple of years with her. And so that's what they had.
Like a Fulbright.
Exactly.
Oh, jeez.
Somebody's written, if there were only 3 words to describe Sinatra, what would those 3 words be? There's always that question.
Great American artist.
No question. During the Capitol years, who had more say over a song, Sinatra or Riddle?
I think the guy with the ultimate say was always Sinatra. The tale you told about Lush Life is an example of it. Somehow he felt defeated by that song.
I asked him many years later, actually was at Bennett Cerf's house, and about Lush Life. I tried to ask in a very gentle way, as if I really wasn't doing what I was doing, asking him about Lush Life. And he said, you know, I hadn't worked hard enough that. I didn't really know the song. And those were his exact words.
Oh, that's good. That's a good story about Sinatra.
I forgot to tell you that. I can add to this something that Nelson said to me often. A Sinatra album is a Sinatra album. Everything about it, from the cover to the sequencing of the songs, to the selection of the songs, to the deletion of a song or two. For example, there's a 16th song for Swingin' Lovers, a magnificent Memories of You. Magnificent. He did record it subsequently, finely, wonderfully. But finally, Capitol put the magnificent one out. It sounds like the album that you've known for 25, 35, 45 years. It was made for Swingin' Lovers in 1956.
Wow.
And this came out in the late 70s.
Wow.
And it was just like the album opened again with a new song. That is to say, one that had been deleted. But that was Sinatra's decision, which one to take off. If you could only buy one Sinatra CD, what would it be?
Wee Small Hours.
Agreed? Let's go on. It's the greatest album ever made.
Yeah, it's really. It's like some extraordinary collection of short stories.
It is.
You know?
Well said. And there isn't a clinker in the lot.
Yeah. No.
Nelson's at his absolute finest.
Yeah.
And Sinatra, that's the moment.
Yeah. Like Dubliners.
Somebody has put this in. This is not from any of you. Remind everyone, Pete signing books afterwards. Next door or here.
Is that signed by my wife? You know.
No, it's signed by Michika Katana. New York Times. Odd thing. So those were questions.
Good.
That obviously relate to Sinatra, and I hope we've shed some light on Sinatra. I think we have, but the real light's coming now, as Pete will get out his book, which might be there, and read for us the closing of this marvelous conversation he had with Sinatra that has stuck with me for so many years. What was the year this book was first published?
98?
Well, this isn't all that too long. But from that to this day, this is what sticks with me.
1898.
Oh. See, now you explain it, why it's been in my head for so long.
So he offers me a ride, and it's like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. It's 1974. And he says, he starts talking. It sure changed this town, he said. When I first came across that river, this was the greatest city in the whole goddamn world. It was like a big, beautiful lady. It's like a busted down hooker now. Ah, well, I said, Babe Ruth doesn't play for the Yankees anymore. And the Paramount's an office building, he said. Stop, I'm gonna cry. He laughed and settled back. We were crossing 86th Street, heading for Central Park. You think some people are smart and they turn out dumb, he said. You think they're straight, they turn out crooked. This was the Watergate winter. The year before, Sinatra, the old Democrat, sat in an honored place at the second inauguration of Richard Nixon. The Watergate tapes would reveal a Nixon who retailed crude anti-Italian slurs. You like people, Sinatra said softly, and they die on you. I go to too many goddamn funerals these days. And women, he said, exhaling and chuckling again, I don't know what the hell to make of them, do you? I said that every day I knew less. Maybe that's what it's all about, he said. Maybe all that happens is you get older and you know less. Right after that, I added a comment, I liked the man who talked that way on a chilly night in New York. I liked his doubt and his uncertainty. He had enriched my life with his music since I was a boy. He had confronted bigotry and changed the way many people thought about the children of immigrants. He had made many of us wiser about love and human loneliness, and he was still trying to understand what it was all about. His imperfections were upsetting. His cruelties were unforgivable. But Frank Sinatra was a genuine artist, and his work will endure as long as men and women can hear and ponder and feel. In the end, that's all that truly matters. Thank you. Excuse me for choking up. I'm thinking of some of the, forgive me for preaching about politics, but some of the unbelievably abysmal ignorance that's being talked about immigrants right now, the people that got us here.
Not the president.
What?
Not the president.
No.
Just wanted to point that out.
Yeah.
Two things related to what you've just read. You weren't taking notes as you were going along.
And most of the time I did.
In that car?
Oh, in the car, not while we were going. As soon as I got home, I sat down and just worked for an hour and a half typing.
Did you ever hear from him on the subject of your book?
Not really, no. No, I'm thinking because I wrote the book after he died.
Oh, wait a minute. Of course.
So unless he was up on top of Lookout Mountain or something.
Of course.
or the Great Hoboken in the Sky, but he knew all along I was taking notes for the possibility of writing the book.
Right.
So he knew that I had stuff in the files somewhere. But even after I backed away from writing the book about him.
And you backed away because?
Because of the Spiro Agnew dinner and, some other stuff. I just didn't like writing, being a ghostwriter. It was not something I wanted to do. And I wanted to do him. I couldn't imagine never doing another one. But even in the end, I couldn't bring myself to do that. Not because I'm so noble. I don't think that's not what the case was about. It was about my kids. I had custody of my 2 daughters. One reason I stopped drinking was I didn't want to do things that would make them thoroughly ashamed of me, one reason. So I didn't want to take the king's shilling, just to, as they say in Ireland, just to get through life. I could make money otherwise.
And the trouble you would have had.
Yeah, could have.
Yeah.
Nobody knows the trouble I've seen.
Isn't it nice to hear from Pete Hamill again?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.